So in chapter 9, we're going to be talking about texturing and UVs, hypershades, and materials. Basically, this is our introduction to texturing, so how we can put color on top of our models and start incorporating 2D texture maps and how light affects the surface of our models. All of these concepts we'll talk about in this chapter. So here's our outline for the chapter. You can refer to it at your leisure, and there will be hyperlinks to each topic covered. So why don't we just go ahead and get into it? All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the hypershade. So we got to be able to figure out how we can open up the hypershade. So to do that, we'll go to Windows, Rendering Editors, and Hypershade. All right, let me delete that one. What you'll first notice is we have these weird little squares. These are our materials. All right, so what is the hypershade? Well, the hypershade is our window slash tool that we'll use to assign materials and edit our materials to different objects within our Maya scene. All right, so what are materials? Well, materials are mathematical nodes that dictate how light reacts with our objects on our screen. And we've already worked with a certain material called Lambert. And the properties of a Lambert are that light doesn't really reflect. It just kind of gets absorbed into the surface of our model. So if a surface like a quilt or a really dully painted piece of wood, uh, they don't really reflect too much light at all. And every object that you create inside of Maya has a default material called Lambert 1, meaning that our light does hit our surface, but it's not very shiny at all, right? Pretty matte, MATTE. All right, so why don't we talk about creating new materials now? To create a new material, we have this whole window right here, and the two materials we're going to be talking about are Lambert and Blend. So I'm going to click on Lambert here, and you'll notice I have a new Lambert node created right here, and I'm going to click on Blend, and we have a new Blend node right here. So if Lambert is matte, meaning it's not very shiny or reflective, then Blend is the opposite of that. So I'm going to go ahead and take this little wedge shape I've made and duplicate it. And right now our Lambert 1 is applied to both materials. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a blend real quick to this material on the right. And it doesn't look like much has changed, but if we look at the back side of our model, very subtle changes occurred. And look at the edge highlight around this rounded elbow right here. So the differences between a Lambert and a Blend, again, is that a Lambert on this model right here, very matte, not very shiny at all, while Blends have a nice shine to them. All right. So why don't we talk about how we can assign different materials to different models? The first technique I'm going to show you is by middle mouse button clicking and dragging. So if I select my Lambert 1, middle mouse button click and hold, and I'm going to plop it onto the shiny material, and notice how this highlight will go away because now we have a matte material applied to this object. If I wanted to apply the blend to this object, I can do it another way by selecting the object itself and going over to my hypershade, holding down the right click and assign material to selection. Now we've kind of just flip-flopped the materials on our models here. Now the right one is shiny and the left one is matte. And why don't we talk about how we can affect the different attributes of our materials so we can give our models new colors, make them transparent and whatnot. So to do that, I'm going to double click on my Lambert 1. Actually, you know what? I'm going to apply this Lambert 3 to that model right there. And we can see drop Lambert 3 onto P cube 8. We can get that little message at the bottom of our screen here. So I'm going to double click on Lambert 3 now. And that'll bring up the attribute editor. So this little button in the top right hand corner of your Maya, that's our attribute editor. So if I double click my material and my hypershade, I get all of these attributes that we can tweak. So let's quickly go over them. Okay. And if we can look at our object on the left here, we can see the changes in action. So if I slide my color bar, we can see that we're getting different values. So we can go from white to black. If I actually click on my color bar, I can apply different swatches, or I can use my color wheel and my value editor right here to really give the exact kind of color, solid color that we want to my material. Our transparency node here, or our transparency attribute rather, I can use the slider and I can make it opaque all the way to completely transparent, basically making it invisible. My ambient color node kind of dictates how light engulfs the object. So the higher the ambient color, the more detail is washed out by light just totally hitting it from all sides. So the higher the ambient color, the more light, the more the light just totally engulfs the shape here. We can barely see any of the fine detail. Our incandescence, if we turn that value up, we actually start emitting light, projecting light straight from the surface of our model. All right. Bump mapping is something we'll get into whenever we start talking about normal maps and bump mapping, basically trick lighting where we can add uh, fake surface detail onto our model. So we'll just leave bump mapping alone for right now. We're not going to get into any of that stuff right now. So those are the main attributes I want to talk about with basic surface qualities. And you'll notice if I double click on my blend, we have those same attributes that we just talked about. But here's where blend gets a little bit different. So if I go over here and we start looking at our wedge right here, we can start talking about specular shading. And to tweak the specular shading attributes on our blend, we can go to our sub menu in our attribute editor. I'll double click my blend again just to make sure I'm in attributes. And we have this whole sub menu with a few different attributes here. So what is specular? What does specular mean? Well, specular is a term we use to describe how light reflects or gathers on the surface of our materials here, on the surface of our objects. A high eccentricity will basically make our objects reflect more light. And we're not talking about reflecting as in a mirror reflects an image. We're talking about how light hits the surface and then bounces back to our eye. So a higher eccentricity, more light reflects back at us. See how it gets, a lot brighter? And we can even look in our node here in our hypershade and see those differences there. Our specular roll-off kind of controls the hotness of that reflection. So if I tone down my eccentricity, basically focusing my reflection of light to a single point right here, my specular roll-off dictates how hot or how much intensity is reflected back at me. All right, we can even change things like the specular color. So if we click on the little swatch there, we can even give different colors to our reflection of our eccentricity. So we can give different colors to our specular. Oh, look at there. Now we can really see how light is bouncing off of our object with these. It's almost like a blue light bulb is projecting straight onto our surface here, right? You can see that little blue light bulb right there. So those are some basic overviews on materials. We're not going to get too in depth with them because down the road we're going to find out that materials work a little bit differently inside of game engines. We're just going to cover the basic two, such as a matte material and a very shiny material such as blend. All right, so that's a very broad overview of materials, enough to get us going on how we can describe surface qualities of our models. The next thing we need to talk about is UVs. And UVs, what are UVs? So why don't I just get rid of the hypershade here, and I'll hide these two cubes here, and I'm going to bring up this basic cube. All right, so before I can even start talking about UVs, I have to talk about the UV texture editor. So why don't we go ahead and open up that window real quick. So I'll go to Windows and click on UV editor. And we get this window right here, and it looks more like a graph you would find in like a geometry class with 4 quadrants. You know, I don't know how much you remember from your math classes, but there are 4 quadrants here representing X being the horizontal plane and Y being a vertical plane. So this is our UV editor. All right, so to understand UVs, why don't we go ahead and select our cube right here. So I'm going to select my cube, and now our UV editor is populated with this upside down T. And believe it or not, this upside down T corresponds to every single face on my cube here. And the way I kind of like to describe UVs is by making a bare skin rug. This is a great example of the concept of pelting right here. So we all know what pelting is by looking at this picture. You can kind of guess. It's taking the fur of a three-dimensional animal. I guess all animals are 3D. That goes without saying. But we're taking a 3D animal's coat of fur, and we're cutting seams, and we're trying to find the best way to flatten out that fur so it can lay flat on the ground here. The same concept applies to this cube. We got to find the places in my cube to cut so we can get it laying flat on our UV editor over here. Okay, because the only way we can get colors and these really specific textures you see in games onto our model is by creating 2D texture files. But for Maya to understand how a 2D texture file is applied to a model, we have to give it a pelted map. We have to give it a bare skin rug so our 2D image files can be projected onto our three-dimensional objects like so. So how do we take this information of the bare skin rug and apply it to our upside down T on our cube? Well, I've created a little animation that might make it a little bit more apparent. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and you can see I've already created seams physically in my model so we can see how our cube pertains to this upside down T. And I want to point out one thing right now. This is not a typical way in which you would do UVs. You do not split up the physical model on our mesh right here. This is just an animation to show the one-to-one translation between this 3D cube to this upside down T. These seams do not exist anywhere except in our UV editor right here. So now that I've mentioned seams, why don't we talk a little bit about what seams are? You've heard me talk about seams on the bearskin rug. You've heard me talk about how I had to make seams on this cube to get it turned into an upside down T. So I need to really figure out how to do that. So if I pause my animation, and let's get back to the regular cube right here. If I go into like maybe the 6th frame, we can already see a seam right there. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and create another natural little cube. You'll notice that if I select the vertice right here, we don't have that seam anymore. It's a complete watertight model. But on my visualization to kind of get us our heads wrapped around the UV editor, we can see that seam kind of start to form in the first few frames of this animation. All right, so this might blow your mind. So I'm going to go back to frame 1 where my cube's all put together. I'm going to select that edge right there. And notice how I drag a marquee on there? Because whenever I play the animation, look what happens. We have 2 edges selected on my cube here. And guess what? Those same edges are selected in my UV texture editor. So you can see a one-to-one translation between my UV island right here and my actual cube here. So what happens whenever we select the edge on the cube that's not busted up and made flat? Well, even if I select that edge right here, notice I'm just clicking once, we get the same kind of thing going on here. We select two edges in our UV editor. These are what seams are. Basically, a seam in a UV editor is any edge that is split open so we can lay our model flat. And you'll see that one edge right here shares two edges in our UV texture editor. And we can see that displayed right here in our animated cube. So now that we kind of got the grasp of how a 3D model is pelted or UV'd onto a flat surface, why don't we talk about how 2D textures are drawn onto 3D models? And the best way to display this is by creating a checkerboard pattern and applying that material straight to our cube. So I'm going to go to Windows, Rendering Editors, and open up my Hypershade. Okay, I'm going to get rid of these two example materials I made. I'm going to make a brand new Lambert. I'll move my UV editor over here. I'm going to double click this new Lambert, and I'm going to call this checkerboard matte inside of my attribute editor. Okay, with this checkerboard material now made, I can go into its color attribute, and I'm actually going to click on this checkerboard pattern right here. And instead of, it doesn't directly apply a checkerboard pattern to my material yet, but it opens up this new menu in which we can create a bunch of different designs like a bulge or a cloth stitch, or even this is how we can attach PSDs and JPEGs to our model. But I'm going to select checker. And what this does is we can even see inside of my hypershade, and I'm zooming in and out with my little icons at the top of my hypershade here. We can actually see now that this node is now a checkerboard. So I'm going to middle mouse click and drag that material onto my cube and press 6 on my keyboard. And I'll do the same for both cubes. So now we can see that my checkerboard pattern is nicely laid out on my models here. So let's open up my UV texture editor. Okay. And here we have, if you look at our icons and tools up here, they may be collapsed. So, we can collapse and decollapse them. We can select display image on and off. And look what that does. Now we can see our checkerboard pattern, but it's a little hard to see my UVs laid out here. So I just want to point out that by displaying this background image, this 2D image and how my T is laying on top of my checkerboard directly translates to how my checkerboard is drawn on my model here. So just to reiterate here, I can select the shell of my object here, and I'll go over how we can select the different components of a UV island right here. But right now I just want to show us how, as I move my T, notice how my checkerboards are being drawn differently on my cube here. And I also want to point out that though our background texture image, our checkerboard image, is only drawn in the positive coordinate plane right here, our 1 and 1, positive y, positive x. If I move my UVs over to another coordinate, I'm still getting that checkerboard pattern. That's because our 1-to-1 space right here is repeated for every coordinate plane that we see here. So no matter where I move my T, my checkerboards are going to show up. And that even means all the way out here. Think of this as just a never-ending repetition of coordinate planes and these little squares where my checkerboard pattern or whatever texture you have right here is going to be drawn and repeated anywhere in this space here. So why don't I take this opportunity now to also talk about UV space. So we know that no matter where I move my UVs, my texture's going to be there to be drawn on my model. What happens if we change the size of my UVs? So why don't I bring this guy right here. And I'm going to hit R for my scale tool. I was using W for my move tool earlier, and these are the tools we can use over here on the left-hand side of the screen. If I hit my scale tool, notice what happens as I scale my UVs. As my UVs get smaller, my checkerboard pattern gets huge on my cube. But as my UVs get larger, my cubes get smaller. So let's see how that pertains to my checkerboard pattern here. So notice my T is really small right now. And look how my checkerboard is playing with my UV island. You know, we have these little faces right here. They're all just sitting on this black square of the checkerboard. Notice how that black square is being drawn on my model. We're not getting much UV space from my texture right here. So we're getting a lot less pixels of my checkerboard pattern being drawn on my model. And vice versa, if I scale this up, look how many checkerboard squares I'm encompassing now. I'm getting a lot of squares. If this checkerboard pattern repeats into infinity, that means I can get more checkerboard squares packed onto the surface of my cube here. So that's something to consider with your UV space. So the bigger your UV islands are, the more pixels, the more texture information you can put on the surface of your models there. So that's something to think about as well. So far, we've only seen, let me turn off this checkerboard background. So far, we've only seen this T-shape UV layout. It's an upside down T. This is what Maya gives you for a default cube. How do you start making your own UV islands? Well, we use a process called projection mapping. So the best way to define or describe what projection mapping is to jump in straight to one of our projection mapping tools that we'll be using. And the first one we're going to look at is planar mapping. So planar mapping, what is that? So if I go into my UV menu up here at the top, I see an option called planar. All right. So planar describes the shape in which our projection is going to be pulled from. So I'm going to select a single face. I'm going to go into 5 mode so we can see my faces easier. I'm going to select a single face on my cube here. I go to UV and go to planar mapping. What you see right now is this projection mapping tool. Okay. And it doesn't look like much. We just see a bunch of new squares and cubes right here. But there are a few things we need to consider with it. If I select this red T at the bottom, I can switch between a transformation handle where I can rotate, scale, and translate my projection mapping tool. And if I press the T again, I get these more general handles here that help me describe the shape of my projection. So this is not quite sinking in, right? I just see like these random handles. Maybe if I selected more than just one face, we can get a better idea of what's going on here. I'm going to select all the faces around my cube here. Now I'm going to go to UV, planar projection, and there we go. That's a little bit better idea of our projection handle right there. You see this gray wireframe shape right here? Think of this shape right here, this square shape with these 4 quadrants here, as a camera, and it's projecting rays. It's projecting like you're taking a snapshot, and it's looking straight at our model here. All right, and we have this little T handle here. Well, I lost it. Be sure not to lose it, because you'll have to reproject. If I select my T, then I get my transformation tools here, and I can rotate it. So now I'm projecting straight onto my model. And you'll notice weird things are going on in my UV editor. It's because we're looking at my cube at different angles according to how I rotate my little projection tool right here. So if I rotate it in this angle right here and move it here, I'm going to position my perspective camera in the same angle that we're looking with at my projection tool. We're looking at my cube like this. So these are the faces that I see, like so. So that's what projection mapping is. It's basically just using a random shape, or it's not so much random. Since we're using a planar tool, it's just we're using a plane to project how we pull our UVs onto our model there, like so. And there we go. We've successfully projected this front of our cube onto our UV right here. And again, after we get it through our projection maps, I'll teach you how we can use all the different components of UVs to edit our UVs even more. And I'm going to quickly go over these primitive projections. I don't typically use them very much, but they do come in handy every once in a while. So if the planar projection uses a plane to take snapshots of our model and translate those snapshots into 2D UV maps, what do you think our cylindrical tool projection does? I'm going to select these 4 cubes, these 4 sides again. Go to UV, cylindrical. It creates a cylindrical projection instead of a planar projection. See, it's almost like a little half pipe, right? And again, the surface, think of this little half pipe as having a bunch of different little cameras just projecting a snapshot. So if I'm a camera sitting on this top little corner of my cylinder here, I'm not really seeing anything. So that's why we have this gap in this UV island here. But if I push my cylindrical mapper straight onto my cube, I now can see my cube, and we start getting a little bit more accurate information in my UV editor. I'm going to select the little T, red T in the bottom of my cylindrical projection tool. And here we can see we can make the half pipe encompass the model more. We can rotate, or we can just scale it up and make it even bigger. Make it taller. Again, just move it around. So that's what our cylindrical projection does. Let's go over our spherical real quick. So I'll go spherical, and you guessed it, it creates a sphere in which we're projecting all of our UVs on. It's encompassing our cube. It has a little red T as well that we can use our transformation tool on, so we can scale it big, we can move it, and we're getting some really funky shapes in our UV editor. Okay, so this is the basis of how we can look at our model, project our UVs based on whatever projection tool we're using, and then we can get in and start editing our UVs to lay them out a little bit better. So I'm going to talk about 2 more projection methods that I find more handy than some of the primitive, like the spherical, cylindrical, and planar projection tools. So I'm just going to select my cube here, and I got some really messed up looking UVs now. It's not an upside down T anymore, is it? No, it's all messed up because we were using the wrong kind of projection tools for this particular shape. So if we go to UV, I guess we need to select our faces. So I'm going to select all the faces of my cube here. And if I go to UV and go to automatic map, first I'm going to select the extra options. And it's important to know how many planes you're projecting from. With our other projection tools, we kind of just had like a primitive shape describe where our projections were coming out of, our rays, our snapshots. With an automatic map, it creates 6 different planes, And if there's 6 planes right here, we can go up to 8 or 12 or 5. It's basically taking snapshots from up here, right there, here, from below, all the different faces, all the different planes that we're using. So if we hit apply on this cube, we get an automatic map from every single plane we're projecting from the top, from the side, to the left, to the right, to the back, everywhere. And what we get are 6 different UV islands here because we're projecting an automatic map from all different angles. So automatic map is a nice, quick, and dirty way to get an approximation of all your UVs on your model quickly laid out from projecting from multiple different planes here. All right, I like using automatic mapping for just really quick and dirty geometric shapes. And a little bit in the video, we're going to see how we can use automatic mapping to UV map the walls of a house, the roof of a house, things of that nature. All right, so we'll get into that, more practical uses for automatic mapping in a second. The last projection mapping tool I want to show us is camera-based mapping, and this one's really nice too. So we've seen projection coming from flat planes, from cylindrical half pipes, from an automatic map that just takes a bunch of screenshots everywhere and then just gives you whatever right here. Well, why don't we do one based on the camera that we're viewing our scene in right now? In this instance, it's perspective, our perspective scene view camera. So I'm going to select these faces of my cube, and you'll notice I have these UVs laid out like this. So I'm going to select those faces again, 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to look at my cube at this angle. I'm just using my regular camera manipulation tools and looking at my cube at this angle. I'll go to UV and go to camera based, and it's almost like we see the cube being drawn in wireframe mode inside of my UV editor. It's really nice because no matter what angle you're looking at your cube, if I project again using the camera based, we get this angle of my cube. Okay, we go right here, we see camera based, we get that angle of my cube. So that's the basis of our camera projection. So maybe it's not all clicking quite yet, so I'm going to quickly walk us through mapping a quick cylinder in my scene using automatic mapping and camera-based projection. And then we'll start talking about the different components of UVs and how we can use different UV tools to get a nice, clean UV layout. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this cube right here. I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder. And why don't we talk about the different components in our UV editor so we can really start getting into the nitty gritty of how we can edit our UV maps. Okay, so here's my automatic default UV map that Maya spits out for our default primitive of a cylinder. This will be a good time to show the different components. You've already seen me use some. If I select edge, I can actually select edges on my UV editor. And you'll notice if I select an edge on my UV map, it selects the corresponding edge on my model. So you can already get an understanding that these UV maps literally are just 2D approximations that have been flattened out of my 3D model. All right, I can hold right click and do the same thing for vertices. All right, I can select that vertice. Oh, and look what happens. As I'm selecting my vertices, remember how we had edges that you select one edge and it was actually like a few edges on our UV editor? Same thing's happening with our vertices here. This one vertice right here exists in 3 different spots in my texture editor. Because we're splitting open, remember we're doing that split where we're splitting open my cube here. So I'll hide this real quick and go back to my cube here. And why don't we select verts this time, and we can see how the verts apply. So if I select the verts on this corner, right now it looks like one vertice, right? But as I open it, we can see that it's actually two vertices. And that's some crazy stuff going on in the UV texture editor. Projection. I think it's doing a camera-based projection right now. But no matter. What I wanted to display was a single vertex on our cube actually translates to two vertices on our UV texture editor. So I'm going to hide this and bring back my cylinder. Okay, if we go to face, face is probably the only thing where you might not find two faces selected at the same time on our UV editor. Every face you'll find on our UV editor right here will be its own unique face. It won't be like an edge where if you select one, it'll select the same edge at the seam of our UV or of our mesh right here. So faces are a little bit easier to wrap your mind around. So two new components that we'll be talking about are shells. So I can go to object mode in my scene view to kind of get out of the component mode in my UV editor. I'll go to shell, and basically shell selects the entire floating island. So we see three separate shells for my cylinder here, meaning three separate pieces are making up my cylinder here. Okay, and again, we can select UVs. We can actually get a handle on UVs. So how are UVs and vertices different? Because from my perspective, if I select this UV and select this vertice, the only thing different is that vertices are yellow and UVs are green. All right, so watch what happens if I go to UV inside of my scene view and select that UV right there. Notice I can't move the UV inside of my scene view, but I can move them inside of my UV editor. But if I select a vertice in my UV editor, they're not doing much there. I can move the UV island there, but I can also move vertices in my scene view right here. So you can't mess with UVs in your scene view. You can only mess with UVs over here in your UV editor. And UVs are kind of like your verts of your 2D world. They describe how your surfaces are laid out and nicely, I guess, stretched on your UV editor right here. It describes the shape of our 2D UVs right here. So why don't we go ahead and remake these UVs of the cylinder using a few tricks we've learned so far and a few new tools that'll really get us better results than what we see right here, the default results that Maya gave us. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use an automatic map. I'm going to just select the top and bottom of my cylinder. And since these are flat shapes, flat geometric shapes that, top and bottom, are an automatic map, it's going to give us a great approximation. See how it naturally just projects those pinwheels for us like so? So I'll go to shell and I'll move my top, my bottom, use a shift selection. A lot of the selection methods still work. I can drag a box. I can hold down shift and control to do an additive select. I can hold down just control to do a subtractive select. So our selection tools are mainly unchanged. They're mainly the same, largely the same in the UV editor here. All right, so that's easy. Those are our UV islands. These are our shells that we're talking about right there. All right, so shells are basically just these floating UV islands that aren't connected to any other kind of UV. They're their own thing. They can be manipulated and scaled independently. And their border edges of the shell right here, the border edge, that's going to dictate a seam in your model. So what do I mean by seam? I want to bring up my hypershade and go ahead and apply my checkerboard to my cylinder here. So if I select the border edge of my UV island of the top of my cylinder here, we can see a seam starting to form as I move around just this piece. You can see my seam in action here. This is going to be a little bit harder to, if you had a detail that continued up and over the lip here, that seam's going to make it very difficult to line up that detail. So avoiding seams at all costs is the name of the game when laying out your UVs. So why don't we go ahead and look at how we can unfold our UVs so we can get them to lay flat. The best way to talk about unfolding UVs is by using our camera projection. Okay, so I'm looking straight on in my cube right now. I'll go into shaded view, and I'm just going to select the front faces of my cube here. And you'll notice I've selected some faces that I've already UV'd. So I'll just right click in my UV editor, go into face mode, hold down Control and deselect those faces. Now I just have those front faces on my cylinder selected. So I'm going to look straight on at the cylinder, try to get every single face in view here, and I'm going to go to UV. And I want you to notice something. Right now, we kind of have like this really stretched out, long, elongated black line for our checkerboard cylinder. Look what happens to our UV editor, how our UVs get laid out right here. And look what happens whenever I do that. Look how they get laid out on our physical mesh as well. Go to UV and go to camera based. Well, it looks a little bit better, right? Now we're starting to see the square checkerboard pattern, but we get this really funky stretching going on right there. Right? And if we look at our model right here, I'll do another UV camera based projection. That's a little bit better. Oh, we're still getting that stretching. Remember, no matter when we do a camera-based projection, the way that we're looking at our model is what's physically projected onto our UV editor here. So I'll go into shell mode, like so, and I'll bring our guy over here. What we need to do is we need to unfold this UV island so each one of these faces right here corresponds to the same width as they are on our physical model. Because right now, the reason why these shapes, these checkerboard squares are so stretched out is because, I mean, look at the face on our UV right here. It's so skinny. We're not getting much, if it was over here, we're not getting much of a surface to project a nice square on there. So what we'll do is we'll select our UVs over here, and we'll just select unfold. So a few things have happened. I think I'm going to undo that because I think we can do some better settings on our unfold tool right here. I'm going to turn off pack. That way it won't rearrange everything. It won't pack my UVs. So if I hit apply, there we go. It only unfolds what I want and it doesn't position them in any right way. So it leaves my faces where they are, but it kind of rotates my UVs in a weird way. So I'll do that. I'll fix that by selecting the shell, hitting E for rotate, and just rotating this island. So now that my squares, oh, look at that. It's so much better. Now I have squares on my model, and you can see that my UV island, now I get equally spaced widths of these faces here, and they correspond to kind of the proportions of my faces on my physical mesh right here, my physical model. So all we have to do is do the back side of that, and it's really nice when I can select faces in my UV editor. I could have just selected all the faces right here, but I know I have these leftover faces in my UV editor, so I can select them there, so I don't have to waste time maybe selecting them in my scene view. And we'll do the same thing here. I'll get a good look at them through my perspective camera with those faces selected. I'll go camera based. I get this wonky, like weird stretching thing going on. And then I'll go to polygons and I'll do, not layout, we won't unfold. And there we go. Now we can see that my squares aren't stretched anymore. All I have to do is come into shell mode right click, hold shell, press E for rotate on the keyboard, and there we go. Okay, great. So we've talked about unfolding now. Now, why don't we something we'll notice is now we have two different seams around the diameter of my cylinder here. Not very good. We got a seam there and a seam here. Why don't we sew these edges together in our UV map so we can maybe eliminate this seam and only have one over here. So to do that, if I go into edge mode in my UV editor and select this edge, I haven't clicked anything, but notice when I go to like a border edge right here, it selects its matching edge. So we know these two edges right here are actually the same edge on our model, like so, but they share a UV border. All right, so I'm going to select both of these edges, go to polygons, and go to move and sew. But we see a little bit of a problem here. This UV island, if I go to shell mode and select it, this UV island is a little bit bigger than this guy right here. So why don't we use another tool to maybe pack our UV islands so they all kind of correspond to the same size as one another, and we're not getting that weird, you know, this island being smaller than this island. So we'll go to polygons and we'll go to layout. Oh, looks like we need to select all of them, so I'll go into object mode in my scene view. And I'll go to shell mode over here. I'll select all my shells. I'll go to layout, and there we go. But that's not doing a very good job. I don't think that fixed it. It just kind of packed them. It didn't correspond to their actual physical size. Because these islands should be roughly the same size, right? Because, I mean, they're symmetrical on our model. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my polygons and open up the extra options in my layout. And I'm going to go to edit and reset settings and then hit apply. Nope, didn't scale them to the right size, did it? So why don't we do this? Why don't we go to pre-scale and let's do world. And there we go. Now our UV islands are roughly the same size, or exactly the same size now. Setting our pre-scale to world scales all of our UV islands to the same proportions to one another as they relate on our physical mesh here. So all of our proportions are equal now for our islands. So now when I select my edge here and go to move and sew, now we get just a perfect shell right here. Notice how it's nice and straight. Everything's great. And I like using these snap rotate tools up here. Go to shell. So now I can go in and scale, and I can pack my UV islands just so. Maybe rotate them just a little bit so they're right corresponding to the grid. I can select these up here. And now we've UV mapped my cylinder. Oh, let me get rid of that. Now we've UV mapped my cylinder where all my squares, checkerboard squares, are no stretching involved and very few seams. All right, so that's the basic UV layout workflow that we'll be using for most of the models you'll be creating throughout your modeling classes here. Of course, there's more tricks of the trade that relate to optimization within your game models, but we'll get to those in later modeling lessons. But this is our most basic, straightforward way in which we can UV map our objects. So what I want to do now is show some practical examples of some UV layouts and some texturing workflows that'll help you get through the assignment parameters for this introduction to texturing inside of Maya. All right, so to get set up, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of some windows here so we can start fresh. I'm even get rid of this cylinder. So we're going to see how we can start texturing the house we've been working with for the past few chapters. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my outer walls. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to analyze my model here, my walls, for the best way to tackle on how we can get a nice UV layout for these walls. So I'm going to go and bring up my texture editor. We can do that by going to Windows, UV editor. And now we can see that my UVs for these walls are just really funky looking. And for geometric shapes, remember, I like to use the automatic tool because my face is already on like an X, Y, Z, right, front, back, left kind of facing orientation. So if I just go to select all the faces on my wall, go to UV, go to automatic map, bada bing. Not only do I have separate shells for each faces of my walls here, but they're all proportioned correctly with one another. So what I'm going to do now is, since I'm going to be using a repeating pattern, I'm just going to select all my shells and just start stacking them on top of one another, like so. A quicker way to do that might be to maybe select all your shells and hit X to snap to grid. I think what I need to do is go and double click my move tool over on the left here, turn off retain component spacing. So now when I snap, oh, maybe select shells first. Is this how we do it? Maybe not so much. All right. So I think I'm trying to find a way to automate the packing process. We'll have to do each one individually. How can we tackle that? I was looking, and I think the only way we can get them to stack on top of each other outside of their shell is by using a script. So we won't get that advanced. I am just going to select them one at a time, actually, and just kind of stack them on top of one another. Like so. There we go. So now all my faces are right on top of one another, and I've packed my UVs. And this is not a very set standard method of doing UVs inside of most practical game engines. This is just a quick and dirty way when we can get textures on the side of our house. So that's all we're really worried about right now. We'll get into standard UV layouts when we get into more advanced models. I keep saying in the future, but this is just an introduction to UVs. All right, so what we need to do now is we need to get a texture to actually put on the side of our house here. So there's a website I like to use called cgtextures.com. I think that's what it's still called, cgtextures.com. I think it's just called Textures, formerly cgtextures.com. So what you'll do is you're going to go to textures.com and you're going to create a free account. You get free 15 downloads every day, so make sure they count. So I'll log in. So I'll pause this so you don't see my login. So I've logged in, and this is just a great site to get a lot of repeatable textures. All right. So with only 15 textures a day, you got to pick the ones you really want to use. So I want to get bricks on the side of my house. So I'm just going to type in bricks. And lo and behold, we get so many bricks here. I can also use the little categories over here. We can find a lot of different bricks. So I'm going to go with a modern brick, and I'm going to go with some brown bricks. And you see we have a lot of different brick patterns here. And a lot of these, here we go. They've really updated the site. I really like this. So if I select like this brick pattern, we can see an icon called seamless. That means that this texture is repeatable into infinity, kind of like our checkerboard pattern and our hypershade. There's our hypershade, and if we pull up our checkerboard, So if we bring up our checkerboard, why don't we apply our checkerboard to our house walls right now? All right, now we can see we have these checkerboards are really small on the sides of my walls right now. So yeah, we're gonna have to fix that whenever we apply our texture on that. And I'll show you a little trick to do that. But we can see that my checkerboard pattern, remember, it repeats into infinity because it's a seamless texture. What we need to do is we need to find the same kind of seamless texture, and that's why I like textures.com. They do a good job of that. Okay, so we'll do seamless, seamless. A lot of these bricks are seamless, huh? So I think we're going to be in a good bet. Now we just need to find the kind of brick that we like. Okay, and I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to get this nice basic one. So here we can see the seamless preview, and we can go even go into preview. Oh, and it'll allow you to see how seamless it is. You just drag and drop and all that kind of stuff. Drag that texture all around. So what I'm going to do now is download the small one, 124 by 124. Just select it and it goes into my download box. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have a folder dedicated just to the textures I download. So I'm going to bring up my chapters box right here. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this textures. And I'm going to go into my downloads folder and I'm going to drag and drop this bricks textures into my brick texture folder that I just made, or my textures folder I just made. And I'm going to rename it and call this bricks seamless, something like that. Okay, so now that I know where my bricks are stored, I can go into my Maya right now. I don't even have to touch Photoshop. We're not really going to touch Photoshop in this chapter at all. We're going to just use a lot of seamless textures and some really slick UVs to do that. So I need to go and bring up my Hypershade, and here we go. Let's start it up. Let me make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to create a brand new Lambert. Double click my Lambert and give this a name called Bricks Matte for material. Bricks underscore matte. And make sure you name your materials. You'll get lost in them if you don't. So if I double click that new Lambert I made by clicking Lambert over here and give it a new name, I'm going to go to color, my color attribute now, and select my checkerboard. And this time, instead of selecting checker, I'm going to select file. And we get this new file node right here. And sometimes you might lose it. It might just disappear. You don't know how to get to that file node you made. Well, if I double click my material, there's file one. You can even call this, bricks JPEG or something like that. And then we'll go to under this image name attribute box right here. Just ignore everything else. All we want to do is link that texture inside of our material. So I'll click on the folder and I'm going to navigate to my textures folder that I made a second ago. And I'll hit open. And now, look at that. We have a brick node. That looks pretty good. So now all we have to do is replace our checkerboard with our bricks material. Oh boy, that looks terrible. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and mess it up a little bit more so we can really kind of hone in on how we can get our textures looking nice on our sides of our house here. So we have two problems right now. First of all, our bricks are way too big. Second of all, they're going in different directions. This side of the house is going that way. That side of the house and all the rest around are going straight up and down. This is the horizontal brick layout is definitely what we want to go for. So what we need to do is we need to come into our texture editor right now and mess with our UV islands. So I'll go to shell, and it looks like this shell is sitting pretty good. That's the direction we need our shells to be facing. So I'm going to select all the rest of my islands here, or my shells here, Shells and islands are interchangeable. And why don't we tweak it a little bit? Okay, so I'm going to select these islands right here that are facing the wrong way. And we have these nice little snap rotate tools. So I'll hit it once, hit it again. And now all my UV islands are oriented in the right direction. There we go. Now all we have to do is I'm going to go into shell mode, select all my shells. And since this is a seamless texture, all I got to do is scale my UV islands. We get a nice brick layout like so. And I will be looking at the scale of your textures. So if your bricks are like that big, those bricks are still a little bit too big. So take special consideration on how big you want your bricks to be, like so. And if you want to be really slick, see how our bricks really aren't lining up, our grommets and grooves aren't lining up. We can select one island at a time. So I can go to UV shell. This is a nice little trick. So if we're in object mode and I just want to select this UV island so I can move it to line up my my bricks right here, I can go to UV and then UV island and then select that whole UV island and then go into my UV editor. And now I can move this ever so slightly so that seam isn't as obvious, like so. I can even move it vertically. So now, maybe do something like this actually. So now my bricks are lining up just perfectly. Now when we look at it, it doesn't look so garish. And we're going to do that for all my islands here. Go to UVs, UV shell, select that side of the house right there. And then in my UV editor, we're just going to move them down so that my bricks align really nicely. We doesn't have to be exact, but special consideration would be nice, right? All right, we'll do the same for that shell. And then, hopefully they line up on all four. And there we go. That's automatic mapping workflow working for us to a T. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and UV the side of your house in the same way. And I'll go over the assignment parameters at the end of the video. But for right now, I'm going to leave my house like that. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and go to Save Scene As, and I'm going to do an iterative save. So I'm going to call this House Modeled UV Introduction 002. So if my Maya crashes, I can always go back to 001, and I haven't lost too much work. All right, great. So now why don't we look at the camera-based projection map texturing workflow. Okay, so I'm going to go in and bring up my outliner. I'm going to hide my walls, and I'm going to bring up my living room, and I'm going to texture map this couch here. So we need to take a look at this couch and see exactly how we can attack the UV layout for something that's a little bit more complex than the walls of my house here. So I'm going to select my couch, and for right now, I'm going to hide the rest of my objects in my living room. There's a few ways I can do this. I can bring up my channel box and turn visibility to 0, or I can go to display and go to hide selection, or Control H, or I can just take my couch and remove it from my living room layer. So now when I hide my living room layer, my couch stays in place. All right. So we're going to work smarter, not harder, on this couch here. How about we only texture one cushion and only texture one half of my couch? So we're going to do a little bit of deconstruction, so get your sledgehammers on. I'm going to delete all of my cushions except one. I'm going to delete half of my couch here. So let's go ahead and do that. But in my previous assignment, I combined my model into one mesh. So first, why don't we go ahead and break up or separate my mesh. So I'll go to Mesh, Separate. There we go. So I can delete all these cushions. I'm gonna texture that one, all but one. And since I did a mirror duplication on this model here, I know I can do a mirror duplication again. So I'm going to delete that half. So now I'm only going to UV one half of this model and one cushion. And after we get done UVing it and texturing it, we can mirror it. And guess what? The UVs will be mirrored with us. All right. So why don't we get to UVing that real quickly. All right. Why don't we just start out with my cushion here. I'm going to do a center pivot on it. My shortcuts are really nice. I like them. So remember, modify center pivot for that. And we're in sub D mode right now. We're going to UV and press 1 on the keyboard and UV in low poly mode. And an automatic map for this cushion looks like it would probably be the best deal. But we want to cut down on seams. So we can either do an automatic map and sew our edges together to cut down on seams, or we can do a camera projection and try to really hone in on exactly where we want our seams through our camera projection. I'm going to do an automatic map and then sew my edges later. So I'm going to take my cushion, all right, and we got some funky looking UVs going on here. So I'm going to select the shell, and I like to move my funky UVs just totally out of the way. I'm going to turn off that background. I'm going to do a UV and do an automatic map. Oh, it didn't work. I have to select those faces. So we go to UV, automatic map, and now we get just a bunch of different faces here for my cushion. What I want to do now is I want to sew the edges on the front, top and bottom of my cushion so I don't get seams right here. So how do I do that? Well, first, why don't we get a handle on my shells here? So right here is the top part of my cushion. With UV shell selected, I can select the front shell like so, and then the bottom shell of my cushion like that. Notice how I'm kind of getting them close to one another in my UV editor. Right now we're just working with shells. All right. So I'm going to select the edge that I want to sew right here. So I know we got a UV border edge right there. See how they pertain to one another right here? So I'm going to go to polygons, move and sew. And what the heck just happened? Well, why don't I get this shell out of the way? I'm going to select the edges right here in my UV editor. Hold down Shift to do an additive selection. Notice how my edges are on kind of opposite sides. Why don't I go ahead and sew these together? Move and sew. Boom, there we go. And then if I select the edge right here, just these border edges, just these seams right there. Go to polygons, move and sew. And now what I have is a nice shell of just the front of my cushion. Now I'm not going to have any weird seams down the front of my cushion here, but I will have seams around here. But this is upholstery. There's going to be seams in my couch. So I'm going to live with that. I'm going to call this cushion done. So I'm going to go ahead and pack these up real quick. I'm going to do it manually by selecting the shells and just moving them like so. Okay, great. And I'm going to get these, kind of put them up here. I'm just going to leave them like that. So my cushion is UV now. And when I go into sub D mode, it actually kind of sub Ds my UVs. You'll notice that my border edges stay the same. All right, so that's my cushion UV. Next, I'm going to UV my couch. So why don't we consider where the seams for my couch will be? I kind of want to have a complete UV island from the foot all the way to the seat to the back, and maybe make my seam right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select just the faces, and this is where support edge loops can be a pain in the butt, because now we have extra faces to select to get our faces projected just so. So you got to be kind of careful whenever you're UVing high poly stuff. Later on in the game, in the class, we will only be UVing low poly models, so we won't have to worry about our support edge loops as much. You can always go in and delete your support edge loops and add them back in later if you wanted to, but it's not taking me much time at all. So you can see that I've selected the faces that I want to be on their own UV island. And now I'm going to use a camera projection to create one seamless UV island based on all the faces I've selected. Okay, so I'm going to get a nice view, try to get every single face that I have selected in view of the camera. We'll go to UV, and why don't I go ahead and really hone in on here. I'll go to UV, camera based, and look at that. I grab my shell, and now we have like this funky weird shape right here. It's kind of the same shape that we see our couch in right now. We'll just go to polygons, unfold, and there we go. It's unfolded our couch, and now it doesn't have that funky shape. And we have one UV shell made for us, like so. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and apply my checkerboard to my couch so I can see my progress being made. All right, so I'll select my couch, assign material, and there we go. I'll get rid of my hypershade for a second. So now you can see my shell is really nice. All right, cool. So now it's just a matter of using that same workflow to UV the rest of my couch. I want to get rid of these rest of these UVs and just get them out of the way. I don't want to get confused there. All right, cool. So I got that UV'd. Why don't I select just the front of my armrest here? So I'm going to just do a major selection there and then whittle away at the faces I don't need. You'll notice I've already got some faces selected that I've got UV'd, so I'll just go into face mode over here in my UV editor, deselect those, maybe deselect at the base like so. I just want to get those faces on the front of my couch here. There we go. And you know what? I'm just going to do a automatic map for that because it's facing straight forward. We don't have any weird angles to it. And there's the front armrest of my couch made. Now I'm going to go up and over my couch and UV map the rest of my armrest here. So I'm going to do that by selecting these. And you'll notice I'm going to kind of get sloppy with my selection. And I'll go into face mode in my UV editor, and I'll deselect the faces I've already UV'd. That gets rid of a lot of the faces I need to deselect over here. And then the rest I'll just deselect by hand. We're going to get rid of the backside faces. Be careful though, you don't want to get rid of the faces that you really want to use. So I might have to go in and deselect some by hand. The support edge loops are making it a little bit trickier. Deselect exactly because we just got a lot more geometry to work with. So here we go. I think I'm doing a good job so far. Deselect those down the bottom. Get rid of these on the bottom. I don't want to have to worry about those. I'm just selecting the faces that I want to UV. It can be a little bit tedious having to work with all this geometry. But again, this is kind of a rare case. We're not going to be really UVing high poly models with a bunch of geometry and support edge loops in them. All right. And it's no big deal if we accidentally get these. We'll probably end up re-UVing them anyway. But I just want to be exact. All right, so notice I just have faces that kind of go up and over my armrest here. And this is going to be tricky because if we use a camera-based projection, we really won't be able to see all the faces due to the angle of our geometry. So I'm going to come up straight at the top. I guess I'll just have to not look at those faces. I'm going to get a nice little averaged image of it. There we go. And that doesn't look like much. And in fact, we've really screwed up the stretching on my couch here. That's why we're going to use my unfold. And there we go. Now I can rotate, and we're getting a little bit of stretching here and there. Maybe we can do another unfold. Sometimes you have to unfold a few times. And there, that's perfect. Notice how we unfolded maybe 2 or 3 times, and now we're getting those squares just the way we like them. So I'll come over here, and you'll notice that my squares are a little bit bigger on my armrest. You know, I'm getting a lot of different size squares on my couch here. I got small ones right here, medium sized ones right here, and really large ones on my armrest. We'll get into scaling those in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and finish UVing the rest of my couch before we have to worry about that. So now I'm just going to select the back of my couch, and it's going to give it a little bit easier. I'm going to go to face, and I'm just going to kind of line it up like so. Select just the back of it, and then I'll deselect the faces I've already UV'd in my texture editor, like so. And I'm going to go into my side view. That'll make deselecting those guys a little bit easier. There we go. And we have a weird little face right there. We'll just get rid of those. I just want to focus on the back side. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. And since the back side is all flat and facing one direction, an automatic map will be great right there. I can even look at my handiwork by pressing 5 then 6 on the keyboard. Look at those nice clean squares right there. It's looking really good. All right, so now we have a few more things to take into account. We have my feet right here. So I'm going to select the bottom here. And then I'm going to hold down shift and press the, the greater than sign to grow my selection. 1 space. So shift, see how it grows up? I'm kind of selecting those faces that edge loop made. And you know what? For these, I'm just going to do a simple automatic map for those as well, like so. And then I'm just going to stack all these shells on top of one another. Really dirty. And then we might put like a wood grain material on that. So those are all my wooden legs of my couch, and I'm going to just put them out of the way because those will be wood. What do we got left? The bottom side of my couch and maybe that guy right up here. So I'm just going to go into my side view, select just really kind of drag a marquee around the bottom side, because look what I can do now. I can deselect all the faces that I've already UV'd and even deselect those. So by deselecting faces I've already UV'd, I can really make sloppy selections and then just kind of pick the faces I haven't UV'd yet. Automatic map, huh? Because it's facing straight down. That's the ticket right there. Go into shell mode, pull it out, and then what faces do we have left? Looks like we forgot these faces. So sometimes you might leave out some faces. See how I left out these faces on the bottom side here? No problem. I'll just select the faces on my UV editor. So here's the island I just made an automatic map for, and here's the island that I kind of left off. So I'm just going to select them both together and just do another automatic map. And it looks like it's actually creating separate islands for those for some reason. So if I select that edge, maybe I'm going to have to move and sew because that island, it's just an automatic map's not putting them together. So I'll select that edge, and there's its twin edge, move and sew edges. Bada bing. Edges is sewn and moved into the bottom. It was from right there, and then it snapped it right there. Perfect. And I think all that's left is this little uh, triangle part right there, and another automatic map for that. Oh, got to do faces. And I'll select the faces. These are the last faces I have to UV. So instead of selecting the faces in my scene view, I'll just select them inside of my UV editor, do an automatic map. All right, so now we have the problem of scale. I got a lot of different scale going on in my couch right now. Not looking too good. And in fact, I'm seeing a little bit of stretching on this UV shell. So why don't I do another unfold? See if I can fix that just by unfolding it a few times. Iterations. Yeah. How am I going to fix these UVs? So it looks like these are the faces that have a little bit of stretching on them. So what if I went in and kind of tweaked the UVs by hand? Would it mess with those faces? You got to be careful messing with them by hand, because some places you'll see stretching and some you won't. So see how I'm just tweaking the UVs a little bit, minimizing the stretching of my checkerboard. Like so. Yeah, I'm not going to obsess over it a little bit. I don't want you guys to either, because when it's all said and done, our couch pattern that we're going to be downloading will probably cover up that stretching for the most part. But what we do need to consider is packing these UV islands so they're all within scale of one another. So why don't we pack these islands so we can fix that scale that we were just talking about. So I'll go to Layout, open up the Layout options. And I think if we do the reset settings, prescale is what we're looking for. We want to set the prescale to world and hit apply, and that'll get all of our UV islands within proportion of one another. And now all of our squares are looking pretty good. That's my cushion right there. I'll bring that in, put it on the 1-to-1. Looking good. All right. Now why don't we go ahead and find a UV texture for this, or a texture reference. So I'll go back to my textures.com, and I'll call this fabric. Maybe we can look for something in fabric. And we see a lot of different designs here. And we don't necessarily have to look for a seamless texture this time. So why don't we find one that's not seamless and make it work for us? I think they're all seamless though. That zebra print, and oh, this cheetah print's calling to me. I think what I'll do is I'll pick the zebra print. Camouflage, yeah, that ain't camouflage. Well, I guess it is nature's camouflage. Seamless. A lot of different fabric patterns to choose from. You can kind of lose yourself in this site if you're not careful. What is that? A bunch of doilies? That's weird. You know what? Seamless or not, I gotta go for the zebra print for my couch. So I'm just gonna download it. All right, do a little bit of file management. So there's my textures folder. Bring up my downloads folder, and we'll just put it right there. We'll call this zebra seamless, like so. So now I got my texture in the right folder. I got it named with a name I like, so I know how to recognize it. Because camouflage, in a few days I might be like, where's my zebra print? And it's been called camouflage, and I get really frustrated. All right, so let's make a new material in Maya. I'll go in here and I'll create another Lambert, double click it, bring up my attribute editor, and we'll call this zebra mat, because that's what the material is going to be. It's not going to be our couch mat. What if we want to use our zebra print on something else like a rug or some other chair in our house? A couch mat on a chair mesh wouldn't make much sense. So we're going to call our material name material by what actual texture is going on it. So I'll select the color for it. I'll select File. I'll select my folder icon. I'll select my zebra print. Oh, now I got a sexy zebra material in my scene. And I'm going to select both of these meshes here. Right click on zebra map, assign material to selection. And there we go. A zebra couch. And I think I can get a little bit more resolution out of this. So why don't I bring up my texture editor, and I'm just going to scale up these UVs a little bit. I guess I'll go to shell. Select these shells, scale them up. By scaling them up, I'm getting more UV space. And there we go. It's a nightmare. Oh, I got these feet to think about. Let me go back to CG textures. I want to look up wood. All right. There's some wood right there. Download it. I have 12 more downloads for the day. There's my textures folder. There's my downloads folder. Wood. Go to Maya, and we're going to create another material, and we're going to give this a laminated wood effect. So I'm going to create a blend. I'm going to call this wood matte. Color checkerboard. File icon. Folder. Select my wood and my textures folder. And now we have a nice wood material. So, you know what? I could just try to get all of those going right there. I wonder if in my texture, there's all my, let's see. Let's go to face. I guess I will just select those faces. I'll grow my selection using shift and greater than. And then I'm going to, with these faces selected, I'm going to go assign material. You can see how we can have two different materials applied to the same seamless mesh. So I'm going to make these, that wood's looking a little pixelated. So I'm going to scale this up a little bit. There we go. And now I need to pay special attention to the shininess of my wood. So I'm going to double click my wood material, because that's just getting washed out with shininess. I'm going to turn down my eccentricity and my specular roll off, and just get a little bit of a laminated effect going on there. There we go. In sub D mode, that the specular highlights are really nice and subtle. See how it's glowing right there? All right, so now I need to mirror duplicate this. So we're not on the 0 axis anymore. So what should we do? Well, I'm going to have to set my own pivot point so I can get an exact mirror duplication going on. So I'm going to hold down D for dog and V for vector. And I'm not going to select any of these little orbits or arrows. I'm going to select kind of just, oh, let me try that again. And I'm just going to snap it to the front corner of my couch here, like so. That handle is really small, but I guess we'll just live with it. I think there's a way where you can increase the size of your transformation handles, but I'm going to go ahead and finish up this chapter real quick. So with my pivot point on the exact edge corner of my model, I've kind of created my own 0 axis. So now, when I hit Control D and do a negative scale on the Z, looks like my pivot point was rotated a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and reset that. So I'll do a center pivot. This time I'm not going to select the rotation at all. Just move it. D, hold down D for dog, V for vector. Now if I do a mirror duplication, now it just looked like maybe my couch was off center. So this is a good moment to teach on. So how do we fix this? My couch was tilted a little bit differently. So we got a mirror duplication problem because our couch isn't correctly aligned to an axis. So what do we do? Well, we could just combine them anyway and then snap them together. But before that, I kind of want to rotate it a little bit so we're not stretching out the model too much. So I'm going to go into a top view and just rotate it like so. All right. Now, I'm not liking that method. Let's approach this from another angle, another way. So before I do my mirror duplication, I want to try to rotate it to be as flush against the grid as possible. So I'm going to kind of push it up, and I'm going to use the grid as a guideline. So I've kind of rotated it along this grid axis. And here I am. I'm going to go ahead and select these vertices. I'm going to hold down the Move tool. I'm going to turn off Retain Component Spacing on my Move Snap settings. So I'll double click my Move tool, go to Move Snap Settings, make sure Retain Component Spacing is turned off. That way all the verts will snap directly to that grid axis. If I move it and hold down X at the same time, just snap it straight down like so. All right, just a little bit of tweaking on that. It shouldn't hurt our UVs too much. I'll do a Control D to copy. This is about to drive me insane. All right, so I think after doing that, what's going on? Get these vertices, snap them. So I'm back, and I've figured out the best way to mirror this couch is we're going to try to rotate. Let's see, so if my verts are like that, we're going to try to rotate my couch as best I can. Get that flush on the grid axis right there. Then we're going to go to vertices, select all the verts right there. Double click my Move tool. Make sure we're in World Axis Orientation. And make sure in my Move Snap settings that Retain Component Spacing is turned off. Hold down X as in Xavier. Snap it to the grid. And there we go. We should have a nice flush mirror duplication to use now. So now I have to reset my pivot point to the bottom of this couch by holding down D for dog, V as in vector. Right down the edge of there. Reset my transformations, or freeze my transformations rather. Don't reset them because that'll get rid of our pivot point we need to duplicate. We can press Control D, scale over. Now we have a flush mesh, right, so like that. Now we'll combine them. select my vertices, merge verts, nothing new here. Same thing we were doing with our weapon. And then position my cushions. Let's bring up my texture now so I can put my cushions in the exact way they need to go. I'm going to kind of rotate my cushions so it doesn't look so obvious that they're just mirror duplications of one another. Oh, there we go. Rotate them up, then back, then a little bit like so. Add a little bit of variation to the couch so it's not so obvious that you're using a bunch of duplicated parts. There we go, and there's my abomination of a couch. All right, so I want to talk about the rest of our chapter breakdown. So here are the parameters of the assignment. First of all, I'm not going to require that you texture your whole house here. I just want to get you guys comfortable with using some of the tools we've used. So all I'm going to have you guys do is I want you to texture your outside walls. I want you to texture your roof, like so. And I want you to texture, let's see, maybe the windows. Oh goodness, what is this green that's happening to my windows? Well, that happens because we have deleted a material in our hypershade that these models once existed on. So all we have to do is select the windows. How do I have to select all these windows? Well, if I did my outliner correctly, I can just select my windows group. I'm just going to right click, assign group selection, Lambert's. So I've selected the whole windows group, give them all Lambert, and now that hot green is gone. So I just want you to do your outside walls, your roof, your window sills. Those are some nice automatic maps and some nice wood grains. And I want you to come on the inside of your house, and I want you to texture your sitting furniture, so your couch or your chair. And then I want you to texture something shiny in your house. Most likely, maybe go ahead and texture in your kitchen, texture your sink or your faucets, you know, something like that. So you can work with blends, or maybe you have an appliance that's shiny. So we'll bring back up the outliner and we can see exactly what we're talking about here. So the parameters are as follows. I'm going to put the timestamp in that. The outside of your walls, your roof of your house, texture the windows of your house, the piece of furniture in your house, and something shiny in your house. So 5 different things we're going to texture just for this assignment. Really want you to perfect these 5 things because next week we'll be finishing out texturing all the other surfaces in our house, and I'll create a video doing all of my objects one by one like I did for modeling them. All right, so thanks for listening. If you have any questions about texturing, just make sure you ask, rewatch the video a few times, follow along as closely as you can. And I can't wait to see what kind of crazy zebra couches you guys make. You know, there's cheetah prints out there too. Later, guys.